He made one promise after his wife left. Not to his family, not to his friends, but to a 7-year-old boy with an orange cap and 14 rays drawn on his son. The promise was simple. You pick her, son, and I'll wait. He waited 3 years. Then one afternoon, in a room full of powerful people who didn't even know his name, his son reached out and grabbed the hand of the most untouchable woman in the building. A CEO worth hundreds of millions. A woman who didn't do soft moments. A woman who had never once let the world see her flinch. But that little boy didn't know any of that. And somehow, neither did she. You said. AB Mui is hook KLIA 1 detailed image prompt leak KDOJ's OPR prompts thy ways HI. The rain had been coming down since 6 in the morning, and by the time Marcus Hale arrived at the Del Vecchio Group's annual vendor summit, his left shoe had a slow leak that filled each step with a soft, cold press of water against his heel. He was 41 years old, lean in the way of men who don't eat enough rather than men who exercise too much, with close-cut hair gone gray at the temples and dark brown eyes that moved carefully across every room he entered. He wore a charcoal blazer he'd owned for 6 years, pressed the night before with the kind of attention that comes from having very little and caring about it anyway. His lanyard read Hale Systems, Vendor, Tier 3, and he tucked it slightly under his collar before walking through the glass doors of the Meridian Conference Center in downtown Portland. The summit occupied 3 floors. Tier 1 vendors, the ones with 6-figure contracts, held the top floor. Tier 2 was the middle. Tier 3 shared a ballroom on the ground level with the catering and registration tables, and the ceiling in that room had a long water stain shaped like a river running east. Marcus found his assigned table near the back, set down his bag, and opened his laptop. Beside him, a young woman from a software packaging firm was already on her phone. Across the table, 2 men from a managed print company were eating croissants and discussing parking validation. Nobody looked at him. The keynote was delivered at 9 by a man named Clifford Pratt, who was Del Vecchio's chief procurement officer and who wore the specific kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no by anyone below him. Pratt stood at the stage on the main floor while the Tier 3 ballroom watched on a closed-circuit feed projected onto a screen that kept buffering. Pratt announced that Del Vecchio was restructuring its vendor ecosystem. Going forward, all cybersecurity infrastructure contracts would be consolidated. Any vendor without SOC 2 Type 2 compliance verified by the end of Q3 would be removed from the approved list. He smiled when he said it, the way people smile when delivering information they find uncomplicated. Marcus wrote 2 things in his notebook. The first was the compliance deadline. The second was a question mark beside the name of the system Pratt had referenced, ClearGrid, a network monitoring platform that Del Vecchio had apparently just adopted, and which was now being described as the backbone of the entire company's threat detection architecture. He had heard of ClearGrid. He had, in fact, submitted a report about it 14 months earlier to his then-contact at Del Vecchio, a contracts manager named Vince Pelletier, who had forwarded it upward, where it had apparently dissolved. The report was 12 pages. Marcus had spent 11 days on it. It described, with specific technical precision, 3 architectural vulnerabilities in ClearGrid's authentication layer that could allow lateral movement across a segmented enterprise network. Nobody had responded. Pratt finished speaking. The feed cut out. The croissants were gone. The woman next to Marcus was still on her phone. At the mid-morning networking break, Marcus carried a cup of coffee toward the corridor where the Tier 1 attendees filtered down for a catered breakfast that smelled considerably better than what was on offer in the Tier 3 ballroom. He was not trying to mix with them. He was looking for a quiet wall to stand against and think for a few minutes undisturbed. He found a quiet wall. He also found, standing near it, a woman he recognized from the headshot on Del Vecchio's leadership page. Nora Voss was 44, with a build that suggested long hours and deliberate choices, dark hair cut practically short, and gray eyes that tracked movement in a room the way a person does when they've learned that inattention is expensive. She was the chief executive officer of Del Vecchio Group, a logistics and supply chain company with 11,000 employees and operations across 14 states. She had taken the role 2.5 years ago, inherited a company with declining margins and 2 unresolved regulatory audits, and turned both of those things around within 18 months. The financial press had written about her 3 times. She had not given interviews for any of them. She was standing alone with a coffee cup and reading something on her phone, and she did not look like someone who wanted company. Marcus was not going to approach her. He was there for the wall. What happened instead was that Clifford Pratt appeared from the far end of the corridor with two men Marcus didn't recognize, moving in the direction of Nora Voss with the momentum of someone bringing an update she hadn't asked for. Pratt saw Marcus before he reached her, registered the Tier 3 lanyard with a glance that lasted exactly as long as it needed to, and then turned his full attention to his CEO. "We're good to go on the ClearGrid rollout," Pratt said. "IT gave final sign-off this morning." Nora Voss looked up from her phone. Her eyes moved once to Marcus, not unkindly, and then back to Pratt. "Full deployment?" she said. "Full deployment. 16 sites by end of month." Marcus did not move from the wall. He did not speak. He looked at his coffee cup. He did think, briefly and with the controlled quietness of someone who has learned to keep things internal, about his 11-day report. About the authentication flaw. About what lateral movement across 16 sites would mean for Delvecchio's logistics network. About the 11,000 employees whose payroll, contracts, and shipment data would live behind a door with a broken lock. He picked up his bag and walked back to the Tier 3 ballroom. He left Portland at 4:15 and made the 40-minute drive south in rain that shifted from steady to heavy and back again. He stopped at the grocery store on Burnside, bought a rotisserie chicken, a bag of rice, and 2 oranges, and was home by 5:40. Home was a second-floor apartment in a building that had been renovated in 1994 and not meaningfully since. The hallway smelled like the neighbors cooking. Tonight it was something with onions, and the second step on the staircase had a soft spot Marcus had been meaning to report for 2 months. He unlocked the door to find the lights on in the kitchen and a pair of small sneakers placed very deliberately in the center of the entryway. His son, Theo, was 7 years old and had gotten Marcus's dark eyes and his mother's absolute certainty about everything. He was sitting at the kitchen table in front of a sheet of white paper, drawing something with a blue crayon, and he was wearing the orange knit cap he wore whenever he was inside and deeply focused. The cap had a small embroidered sun on the front. Theo had received it the previous winter from a neighbor who had moved away, and he had since worn it during homework, during movie watching, during the eating of meals he considered important, and on one notable occasion, during a haircut. "Dad," Theo said, without looking up, "Mrs. Garland says I drew the sun wrong." Marcus set down the groceries. "What did Mrs. Garland say was wrong about it?" "She said it has to have 8 rays. I drew 12. "How many rays does the actual sun have?" Theo looked up. "It doesn't have any rays. That's just how people draw it." Marcus took off his wet jacket and hung it on the hook by the door. "Then draw it however many rays you want." Theo considered this with the gravity of a philosopher receiving a ruling. Then he went back to the drawing and added 2 more. 14 rays. Marcus made a note of this somewhere quiet in himself and went to start the rice. They ate dinner at the kitchen table. The chicken pulled apart and served over the rice with a little salt and the leftover hot sauce from the refrigerator door. Theo told Marcus about a boy at school who had brought an actual compass, the navigational kind, not the drawing kind, and let everyone hold it, and about how the needle trembled when you walked it near the window. "Why does it do that?" Theo asked. "The building might have steel in the frame. Metal pulls the needle off true north." Theo thought about this through 2 bites of chicken. "So the building is lying to the compass." "Not lying, just interfering." Theo accepted this. He peeled his orange with the methodical seriousness he applied to all tasks he'd decided were worth doing correctly, separating each segment individually before eating them in a specific order Marcus had never been able to determine the logic of. Later, after Theo was asleep, Marcus sat at his desk with his laptop open and pulled up the ClearGrid technical documentation he'd bookmarked 14 months ago. He opened the report he'd submitted. He read it again, slowly, the way he read things he needed to be certain about. He was certain. He opened a new document and began to write. The next morning Marcus sent 2 emails before 6 a.m. The first went to Delvecchio's general vendor inquiry address, requesting a direct meeting with the IT security team. The second went to a contact at CISA he had worked with 3 years prior, flagging a general concern about a commercial network product and asking if there were any active advisories. His CISA contact responded at 7:42. There were no current advisories on ClearGrid. His contact added, almost as an aside, that there had been a report submitted by a third-party researcher in the past 18 months that was still under review. Marcus replied with a single sentence asking if the report had been submitted through the vendor disclosure portal. His contact replied, yes. Marcus looked at that word for a moment. Then he attached his original 14-month-old report and sent it as a supplementary reference. The Delvecchio inquiry email did not receive a response. He drove Theo to school at 7:50. Theo was wearing the orange cap. At the curb, Theo turned before going through the door and said, with the slightly formal tone he used when announcing decisions, "I'm going to draw the compass today. The real kind. The navigational kind," Marcus confirmed. "With the trembling needle," Theo said and went inside. Marcus sat in the parked car for a moment after the doors closed. Then he drove to his office, which was technically his second bedroom, with a folding table and 2 monitors and a filing cabinet that contained, among other things, the printed copy of a 12-page report nobody had acted on. He spent the morning working on an unrelated project for a small accounting firm in Eugene. He did this carefully and completely because he had agreed to do it and it needed doing. At 2:19 in the afternoon, his phone rang. The number was a Portland area code he didn't recognize. "Is this Marcus Hale?" a woman's voice said. "It is. This is Nora Voss." There was a silence of about 4 seconds. Marcus did not fill it. "I understand you requested a meeting with our IT security team," she said. "I'd like to understand what you're trying to tell us, Mr. Hale. I'd like to hear it directly." The meeting was held the following morning in Delvecchio's main building on the west side of Portland. Marcus was given a visitor badge and taken to a conference room on the 3rd floor by a young man who apologized twice for the elevator being slow. The conference room had a long glass table and windows facing west toward the hills, which were still green from the rain. Nora Voss arrived 4 minutes after Marcus. With her was a man introduced as Delvecchio's VP of Infrastructure, Warren Chu, who was somewhere in his late 40s and carried the look of someone interrupted mid-crisis. Behind them was Clifford Pratt, who saw Marcus and made a micro-adjustment to his expression that lasted less than a second before he settled on something professionally neutral. "Mr. Hale," Nora said, sitting down, "you submitted a concern through our inquiry system. You also apparently submitted a report to a federal agency. I want to understand the sequence." "I submitted the federal reference as supplementary documentation," Marcus said. "I had originally submitted the findings to your organization 14 months ago through your vendor contact framework. I never received acknowledgement." Pratt spoke. "We receive hundreds of vendor communications. Not all of them represent credible technical concerns." Marcus opened his laptop. He turned it to face the table. On the screen was a diagram of ClearGrid's authentication architecture. He had rebuilt it from the public technical documentation, the developer API reference, and 3 open-source community threads where network engineers had documented anomalous behavior during multi-node authentication handshakes. The diagram was clean and precise and annotated in a way that a competent person could follow without additional explanation. "This segment here," Marcus said, pointing to a junction in the diagram, "handles authentication tokens between nodes during a failover event. When a node goes offline, the system is designed to temporarily fall back to a legacy verification protocol to maintain continuity. That fallback has a 30-second window in which token validation operates in a degraded mode. During that window, a properly formatted but unsigned token will pass." Warren Chu leaned forward. "An attacker who can trigger a node failover on demand," Marcus continued, "and who can simultaneously present a token during the degraded window, can authenticate as any user in the network segment, including, in your case, payroll, shipping manifests, vendor contracts, all of it." The room was quiet. "Can you trigger the failover?" Warren said. "Without being inside the network? If you have access to a single compromised endpoint anywhere on the network, which in a system deployed across 16 logistics sites, each with supply chain partners connecting in and out daily, is a realistic exposure." Warren looked at Nora. Pratt said, "This is a single vendor's interpretation of technical documentation. We'd need our security team to..." I can replicate the failover in a sandboxed environment, Marcus said. If your IT team wants to observe it, I can have the demonstration ready by this afternoon. Another silence. Nora Voss had not looked away from the diagram. When did you first identify this? She said. 14 months ago. She looked up at him then. Something moved through her expression, not guilt exactly, but the particular form of attention that comes when a person realizes the shape of a mistake has been there longer than they knew. Warren, she said. Get your team in here at 2 o'clock. The clear grid rollout, Pratt started, is paused, Nora said. She said it the way she probably said most things that were decided. Once, flatly, without inflection, and not again. The demonstration took 4 hours. Marcus ran the sandboxed environment on his laptop, walked Delvecchio's 3-person security team through each step, answered 11 questions with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything, and at 6:14 p.m. watched Warren Chu sit back in his chair and say, quietly, we would have been completely open. The clear grid representative who had been patched in by phone went quiet for a long time. Then he said they would need to loop in their engineering team. Marcus closed his laptop. Nora Voss walked him to the elevator herself. In the corridor, with the hum of the building around them and no one else present, she stopped. The report you submitted, she said, 14 months ago. It went through Vince Pelletier, your contracts manager at the time. Pelletier left the company 9 months ago. She paused. I don't know if the report ever made it past him. Marcus pressed the elevator button. I'm going to want to know what we can do with Hale systems going forward, she said. In terms of formal engagement, there's clearly a gap in how we've been vetting infrastructure vendors. I'll send you a capabilities document, Marcus said. Not through the general inquiry system, she said. No, Marcus agreed. The elevator arrived. He stepped in. As the doors began to close, Nora Voss was still standing in the corridor, and she was looking at the diagram he'd left printed on the conference room table, which a member of her team was carrying out with the particular care people use when handling something they understand they nearly lost. 3 weeks passed. Marcus rebuilt his report into a formal audit proposal and sent it directly to Nora Voss's office, as she had directed. He heard nothing for 9 days, and then received a 2-line email from her assistant scheduling a contract discussion for the following Thursday. On the Wednesday before that meeting, Marcus went to Theo's school for the fall parent information evening. He sat in a small chair designed for 7-year-olds and listened to Theo's teacher describe the curriculum and answer questions about the reading program. On the wall behind the teacher were the children's drawings. Self-portraits, mostly, hung in a long row. Marcus found Theo's without difficulty. It was the one where the figure in the center was wearing an orange cap with something small embroidered on the front, and the sun overhead had 14 rays. He looked at it for a moment. Then he took out his phone and quietly photographed it. The teacher caught him on the way out and said that Theo was a very deliberate thinker and that she meant that as a compliment. Marcus thanked her. Walking to the car, in the autumn air that smelled like wet leaves and someone's would smoke, he felt the particular lightness that comes not from things being finished but from things being correctly in motion. The contract discussion on Thursday ran 2 hours. Warren Chu was there, as was someone from Delvecchio's legal team. Nora Voss arrived 20 minutes late and had clearly come from another meeting, but she was focused from the moment she sat down with the precise, unborrowed attention Marcus had noted the first time he'd seen her. They were discussing the scope of a formal vulnerability assessment program when the subject of the original summit came up. Clifford Pratt, who was not present at this meeting, had apparently asked that the conversation be had directly and not around him. He wants to say something to you himself, Nora said, which was how Marcus found himself at 4:30 that afternoon, in the same Tier 3 ballroom at the Meridian Conference Center where he'd sat in the back with a cup of coffee and a Tier 3 lanyard 3 weeks earlier. The room was empty now. The catering tables were gone. The water stain on the ceiling was still there, shaped like a river running east. Pratt was waiting by the far wall. He was alone, without his usual orbit of associates, and he looked, without that orbit, like what he probably was underneath everything. A man under considerable pressure trying to protect a procurement decision he'd championed and which had nearly gone very badly. I owe you a direct acknowledgement, Pratt said. He spoke carefully, the way people speak when they have rehearsed something but are trying to make it sound unrehearsed. I dismissed what you were there for at the summit. I looked at the lanyard and I made an assumption. If I'd taken 2 minutes to ask what you knew, we'd have been 3 weeks ahead of where we are now. He paused. I also should have asked why a Tier 3 vendor was trying to get someone's attention at a general networking break, instead of assuming it was opportunism. Marcus said nothing for a moment. He wasn't being cold. He was genuinely considering whether there was anything useful to add, and concluding there wasn't. It happens, he said. Pratt nodded. He seemed to want more from the exchange, some further resolution, some visible forgiveness, but Marcus had found over the years that visible forgiveness was usually more for the person offering the apology than the one receiving it, and he was not in the business of providing comfort for its own sake. They shook hands. It was brief and adequate. Nora walked Marcus out. They stood for a moment on the front steps of the conference center, where the evening air was cool and the street was quiet and the rain had finally and completely stopped. He's not a bad person, she said. He's a person who made a structural error in how he categorized risk. And people. I know, Marcus said. The contract will be through by end of next week, she said. Warren is already building out the scope. It's going to be substantial. Marcus nodded. She was quiet for a moment. Then, with the slight shift in register that marks a person stepping briefly outside a professional frame. You have a child? He looked at her. A son. 7. What's his name? Theo. She nodded, as if this told her something. Get home to him, she said, and went back inside. He was home by 7. Theo was at the kitchen table again, same position, but tonight the project was different. He had constructed something from folded paper, a small triangular structure that Marcus, after a moment, recognized as an attempt at a navigational compass rose, for points with small marks between them, slightly lopsided but identifiably itself. The orange cap was on his head. North is supposed to be longer, Theo announced, not looking up. That's the convention, Marcus said. He set down his bag. Where'd you learn about compass roses? Library book. Mrs. Garland got it out for me. Theo held up the paper structure and examined it critically. The needle trembles, he said. Marcus stood still for a moment. Outside, a car passed slowly, its headlights sweeping across the kitchen ceiling and then gone. And in the brief light, Theo's cap looked very orange, and the embroidered sun on the front had, from a certain angle, the suggestion of more than 8 rays. It does, Marcus said. He sat down at the table across from his son, and Theo passed him a sheet of blank paper and a blue crayon, with the implicit and total confidence of someone who has never considered that the person they are handing things to might refuse, and Marcus took it, and drew the north arrow longer than the rest, and the compass was slightly wrong but it was theirs, and the kitchen was warm, and outside the rain was finished and the air was clean and cold, and the window held a square of sky going from gray to dark, and a single bright point of something, star or plane, it was hard to say, moved through it slowly from west to east, steady as a needle finding true.